Now, to join Maria on stage, it gives me a great pleasure to invite Chief Product Officer of Grab, Philipp Kandal.
Hey,
Welcome.
great to see you all.
I know, look at this packed room.
Wow, everybody made it early, even with all the Jakarta traffic. I'm very, very impressed.
All right, Philipp, it's so awesome to have you on stage today. You've had a pretty incredible journey. You started out as a founder. You've worked across Europe, the US, and Asia, of course, and so cannot wait to deep dive some of your career journey and your experiences and lessons learned along the way. So let's start with maybe a personal introduction. If you can kind of tell us about your career arc and how you ended up running Grab's product team here in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, so that's a very, very long story, but I'll try to keep it very short and succinct. As you said correctly, I really started my career as a founder. I have both started companies that were not successful, so I'm not going to talk about them today here. But I've luckily also had a good, successful exit. I started a navigation and mapping company, grew that to 100 people and profitability, sold that to a Silicon Valley company where I was leading there 500 people engineering team across Silicon Valley, China, and Europe. And ultimately, what really drew me to Southeast Asia was the growth and the mindset here, the positive energy. I really, as a former founder, I really like the spirit of growing and developing new things, building things that haven't been built before. And a friend of mine introduced me to Grab, and over drinks, he convinced me that this is the best way that I can spend my life. I'm personally always very driven to create impact, and he convinced me that Southeast Asia and Grab is the place to have most impact possible. So that's what got me here about 4 years ago.
Amazing. So I think some of the things I want to deep dive thematically would be, of course, the transition from founder to CPO, but then also the process of working across multiple different regions and the context it takes to build amazing products for each one of those regional, local regions rather. So maybe let's start with that, which is, what is it like moving from a founder role to a product leader role, a CPO role? Any differences or similarities that you see between the two roles, or how do you kind of think about that juxtaposition?
So for me, a product leader is always an entrepreneur in that area. They really need to always have the spirit and mindset of creating something new, right? So even at Grab, even every individual product manager, they need to have strong ownership and this entrepreneurial mentality to create something in their area. So I think from the general skill set, the skill set for a founder and a product leader, I think is very, very similar in my experience. I think for me personally, the biggest transition was being in a much, much larger company, right? For me, I think I tend to be really love to get stuff done fast and so on, and have teams that are really moving fast. So obviously, the larger the company, the more alignments and so on you need. So for me, that was one of the things that was the biggest transition from running a small, lean, super fast team to running something that's much larger. And it comes with the pros that you can drive much larger impact, but it comes also with a change in style that is needed. So that was kind of my learning.
Got it. Okay, so that sense of ownership is basically the same whether you're a founder or a product leader. Of course, many founders, one of the things that they like about being a founder is that they technically don't have a boss. What do you say about that in your role as you've kind of transitioned into the CPO role?
So my personal experience is you always have a boss. Right? If you're a founder, then the investors are the boss. So I think it really doesn't matter, right? I think the mindset I always had is whatever I do, I try to create as much value as possible. And then usually people that you're reporting to or so on, they ultimately have the same goal, and then everybody is aligned, right? So I never really had a challenge with that. But I would say almost any role that you have, you need to convince others, and you need to have the ability to really excite people around you, right? And that's for me, as a product leader, as a founder, the skill set to have like something that you believe in and communicate this in a way that other people want to make that happen, right? Like, it's very rare that a person you can make something happen on your own. You need to get other people excited about a vision. You need to do that in a way to be inclusive, to learn what input they have and like make that vision stronger. But you still need to get people around you excited, right? Like, so that's like if you have a boss, if you have investors, if you have customers, right? Like there's I think when I was like younger, then I was always like, oh, like I reached this goal and then I don't need to listen to anybody. And I learned this is a really bad idea, right? Like I think like this kind of like youthful vision that you said, like at some point in time, I can be the one that like makes all the shots is really not good, right? Like, because you have always either, again, like your boss, investors, or customers that you need to listen to because they have valuable input. So now I actually made this like something I enjoy and not something that I think is a bad thing.
Yeah. It's like when you're a kid and you're like, I'm going to be, like when I'm a grown-up, there are going to be no rules and I can do whatever I want. And then you're grown up and you're like, oh my God, there's so much responsibility and just like crap I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Okay, let's talk about transitioning, I think, between the different regions that you've worked in. Of course, like starting off in Europe and then the US and now Asia. Can you talk about what it takes to build a successful product and a successful product team in each one of the regions? Any similarities and differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the core about building a successful product is in my mind, is always the same. It's listening to customers and partners, what they really need. And that is why a lot of Silicon Valley companies struggle building successful products in Southeast Asia, because the needs are so different, right? Like I think a lot of you here who are from like Jakarta understand, like in Jakarta, if you build, for example, let's say my previous domain, maps without mapping all the narrow side alleys and roads, then it just doesn't work, right? Like in Jakarta, a lot of you will understand that most of the transport happens on motorcycles. In Silicon Valley, that's unthinkable, right? Like if you put like anybody, like in Silicon Valley, like almost like no person would book a motorcycle taxi, right? Like people ride a motorcycle for recreation, but using it like as a form of transport is almost unheard of, right? Like, so I think really this understanding the needs, I think, is at the core of building a successful product, like no matter which region you are. So that's like, I mean, one thing I've seen work everywhere across the world. What I would say in Southeast Asia, even in the few years that I've come, I've seen the tech ecosystem mature a lot. Right? Like when I early come, there were a lot of people that were like hired from abroad and like brought in. And the local tech ecosystem has really developed at a tremendous pace. So I think like, I mean, still like Silicon Valley has a lot of the amazing like innovation, but I think like Southeast Asia is catching up like really fast and building its own like homegrown talent at a really rapid pace. So that's what I'm personally really excited about.
Completely agree. It's really amazing to see what's happening on the ground here. Okay, let's talk about your role as CPO of Grab. Grab is obviously like one of the most famous companies in Southeast Asia at this point. I'm a daily active user. So what, to you, when you stepped into this role, what was your big vision? What was your purpose? And what do you hope to accomplish as the CPO of Grab?
So I'm still trying to learn every day. Right? Like I'm really strongly believe that this is a continuous journey. But the one thing that I believe, and that was like the mission that like Grab was founded on, was like digitally empowering Southeast Asia. Right now, we're very lucky that roughly 1 in 20 people in Southeast Asia use our service every month. Right? Like, so it's a substantial amount of people that get to enjoy our service, but there's still 19 of 20 people that can't use or that don't use our services every month. Right? Like, so what I really believe that this empowering Southeast Asia through technology is what really motivates and drives me every day. So I'm thinking of like, hey, how can we get the other people also to benefit from services like Grab? And one of the things in Southeast Asia that's super important in order to make that a reality is affordability. Right? Like, so I think we know that the economic distribution in Southeast Asia is very, very different than in the US or in any other market. So that's like really like drives me to say like, hey, what can we do to make our services more affordable so that more people can use them and benefit from them every day, right? Like, so that's like the one key thing. And the other thing, right, like we're really driven by creating opportunities for the entrepreneurs on our platforms, our drivers and our merchants. right? Like, so while on the one side, we really have to make sure that we can offer more affordable services to our consumers, we need to also create more income opportunities, because if more and more people use the services, it will be beneficial for our merchants and for our drivers. So there's things like bunch of products that we've introduced, right? Like, so we've introduced food delivery services where people can indicate like a saver food delivery option, where they said, if I'm willing to wait a little bit longer, then we can batch a bunch of orders together. Let's say in the neighborhood, instead of delivering your order only, we deliver like 2-3 orders at the same time, so you can have more affordable food, because basically the delivery fee gets split, and so more people can use our service, and drivers have more income opportunities because more people order, right? Like, so that's kind of like the win-win scenarios we're trying to create by offering more affordable services and then creating more earning opportunities for our drivers and merchant partners. So that's I think kind of what I'm trying to drive at every day.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I think pricing conversation in particular, I mean, it's a little bit easier for like an on-demand platform such as yours, but I think that pricing conversation, sometimes it sits with marketing, sometimes it sits with strategy, but what you just gave was a good example of how product can actually influence product pricing. Sorry. So when you first joined, you actually joined Grab Maps. That was your first role. So what was your goal with Grab Maps in the beginning, and what are some of the most product features that you're most proud of rolling out in your tenure?
Yeah, so Maps is obviously a domain I love. I've worked like 15 years in Maps, so and I'm probably one of the people with the worst orientation, so I really need them. So I'm a good builder and consumer of Maps. So when I originally joined Grab, basically the company has realized that maps are at the core foundation of everything that we do, right? Like in transport, maps are at the foundation for passengers meeting drivers, pricing our trips, and on food delivery, same, right? Like we have this unique feature that what I always say, our food needs to be delivered from the kitchen to the couch, right? Like at least to the doorstep, not quite like literally to the couch. And so the challenges that we faced when we started the journey to build our own maps, right? Like, and we were the first ride share and food delivery company that builds our own maps in the entire region. What we faced is that basically in many of our markets, we've seen this narrow side alleys, this narrow roadways, they're just not mapped. And I mean, I came from Silicon Valley before, and the way that you would normally do it, you deploy these like massive mapping vans. Like you've seen these like big vans with like a super expensive camera on top. And they're like $150,000, $200,000 each. So I had a bunch of vendors who said like, Grab, you should just buy a bunch of those and send them through Southeast Asia. And we have realized those vehicles won't even fit into these narrow side alleys. They will get stuck. I mean, the car will be just complete trashed by like driving through this narrow Jakarta side alleys. So what we did, we went like to first principles, said like, no, we develop cameras that our drivers on motorcycles can use. So we developed these little cameras ourselves that we put like on the helmets of drivers, on the back of the motorcycle, and then we could send through these like narrow side alleys. So what we've accomplished in Southeast Asia, we have more images captured than anybody else, because we've built equipment that's purpose-built, right? Like, so what I'm really proud of is especially this kind of like last mile mapping of all these narrow alleys and so on, so that our drivers can really get to where they need to do. So that's, I think, like the number one thing where we've really like created technology not for the sake of technology, but really to make people's lives better every day, because it's pretty stressful if your driver doesn't find you or your food that gets delivered to your neighbor, right? Like that is the problem that we want to solve, that the thing really arrives to you and your driver meets you where he needs to do. So that's like, I think the number one thing and maps that we've really innovated in.
That's pretty phenomenal and definitely a game changer. So I mean, it's usually easy to sit on stages like this and be like, oh, and then we develop maps and it's all amazing. But tell us about some of the harder parts during the product development cycle. Like, what were some of the biggest challenges as you were kind of rolling out this last mile mapping technology? And was there ever a point where you were like, I don't think we're going to be able to get this product to market, or you were worried about the overall success of the project?
Yeah, so a lot of people when we started this project thought that we were very crazy. Like when Google went out and mapped North America, I think there's like some public numbers in the tune of like $1 billion of that they spent, right? Like, so in the mapping industry, right? Like the common joke is like you can map everything, but it'll cost you at least like $1 billion, right? Like, and that was obviously not something we were prepared to invest on, right? Like, so really the biggest challenge that we're facing is really how to make it like economically viable. And there was like many points, right? Like where we built really this mapping around our drivers. So we call this like gig mapping. So we actually paid our drivers. We paid our drivers to drive around with the cameras. We sent them around serving like house numbers and addresses. And so the biggest challenge that we face is like our drivers are not cartographers by any stretch, right? Like their job is like to drive. And we had to give them tools to say like, oh, which house number is this? Where's this point of interest and stuff like that. So at the beginning, the first versions that we tried, we got a bunch of like really bad data, and not of bad intent, because it's just like relatively complicated. We've taken a domain that normally like cartographers were doing, and we tried to teach a driver in kind of like a 5-minute introduction, hey, how do you do this? That somebody spends years studying at university, right? Like, so the biggest challenge really was how to simplify the user interface to capture this data and do it successfully. And then like the big breakthrough that we had is we learned that we don't necessarily need to have every driver get everything perfect. We just have drivers cross-checking it. So you have like one driver, for example, capturing an address, and then we send a second driver to verify it. And that way we get super high accuracy, because it's very unlikely that both get it right. But even if every single driver is not as accurate as a cartographer mapping everything perfectly, that's there, right? Like, so that was like for me the beauty when we learned that saying just letting like 2 people cross-verify their work gets to a level where 2 non-experts can be better than an expert before. So that was one big challenge we faced, and how we've solved it.
Amazing. Okay, a few more questions, and then we're going to actually open it up to the floor. So if you have a question, get ready. We'll have people passing around the mic. So you obviously, you run a very large product organization now. So would love to hear, we have, in our audience today, we have people who are just starting out as product managers, at mid-level, senior level career. So how do you think the role of a product manager kind of changes as one goes through and climbs through the career ladder and grows up in maturity and seniority?
I think in my personal experience, the core principles haven't really changed for me that much through the different stages what I've done. I think a few things that I believe is like super important for any product manager is, first of all, you need to really enjoy making people around you successful. Like, because as a product manager in most organizations, you don't have everybody report to you, so you can't like tell everybody what to do, but you need to like convince them, right? Like, and then the best way to do this is if people really love working with you. If you make everybody around you successful, they eventually will make you successful, right? Like, so I think that's one thing. And then the second thing that I believe is really important, the like intellectual humility and the ability to learn. In many cases, your initial instinct will tell you something, and often it might be the right thing to do, but you need to be able to admit when you've been wrong and learn and adjust, right? Like, so many cases, like we've launched products that were super successful, which I would have never expected to work, but I was willing to try. I told the team, like, look, I mean, it doesn't really matter what I believe. If we can launch it, we can try, and we can see that it works, then I'm willing to be convinced, right? Like, so I think maybe the one thing that changes as you get more mature and more senior in leadership, you need to be better at like letting go, right? Like, I think the one thing is people usually get promoted because they're really good at something and they're really detailed and in-depth in something. If you want to scale yourself to be a leader, then it doesn't work by being best at everything, right? Like, in general, I'm worse than any of my product leaders in their domain, right? Like, if I would be better than everybody, that would really speak badly of the leadership team that I've built. So the team for us that's leading like our consumer experience is much better at it than I am. So I shouldn't try to be better at what they're good at, but I can like ask them the questions and ask them like, hey, have you considered this? Or do you know like this division that is going on? So I can give them like perspective and like help them to discover something. And I think that's what's different, right? Like as you go in your career stage from being an expert and really knowing like all the answers, it shifts to much more like being able to ask the right questions to help people discover. So I think that is like what I've learned, that I need to be more like this like coach and like giving people like thoughts and questions, but ultimately empower them to make the decisions. I think that's one thing that changes as you go higher up in the ladder, because ultimately all these people need to make the decisions and not you.
Absolutely. Wow, sorry guys. So for you, was that transition natural, like from an IC, an expert IC, to a manager and a leader, or did you, like what were some of the ways that you kind of got better in terms of that manager and team lead role?
So I still do miss the days at being an IC. It is a very
where you can go like really deep on a certain thing.
Yeah, and it's like you see the impact you're creating very tangible, right?
Yeah.
Like you create, either if you're on the software engineering side, you create a piece of code that runs, or if you're a product manager, you create like a specification and a product that you can see launch. So the tangibility of like work as an IC is quite amazing. And at Grab also, we have ICs that are super senior, right? Like, so we have like, I think it's a wrong perception many times in companies that people need to be a manager to advance in their career. I think you can be an extremely senior IC that's leading products that are super, super impactful. So I would clarify that. But then I think the other part is really, as a manager, your role shifts on making other people successful, right? Like I think that is what you like really, you need to give up this level of control that you do this to like shift that mindset. And a lot of people have a hard time doing that transition. And I mean, it wasn't easy for me naturally as well. So that's been quite a journey.
Great. So thank you, Phil, so much for this fireside chat. Phil will be hosting a meet and greet for ProPass holders around the back. And thanks everybody for joining us.